Welcome to Season 3 of Far Reach Voyages, where we share our love of sailing and adventure travel. In Season 1 and 2 of Far Reach Voyages, I shared my December 2015 double-handed voyage from North Carolina to the Virgin Islands with my sister Tricia, and then my May 2016 single-handed voyage from St. Maarten back to North Carolina. In Season 3, I'll single-hand the Far Reach back to the Virgin Islands in December 2018. But before I sailed back to the Virgin Islands, I had a number of boat projects to complete. I don't have much video of the project, so this episode's mostly still photos and narration. We'll pick back up with the film in episode 2. But if you're interested in ideas to keep your boat simple, or tackle big projects in a simple manner, or you're just curious about our continuing refinement of the Far Reach, then you might want to stick around for this episode. So let's get started. In August 2016, we had the Far Reach hauled out near Beaufort, North Carolina. First project we tackled was to repaint the topsides. Though I had hired a certified all-grip painter to spray the boat in my shed during the 2008-2015 rebuild, the paint failed during our first voyage. Essentially, the all-grip bubbled all the way around the boat from the waterline up about 10 inches. I contacted All-Grip when I returned, and they sent 2 technicians to look at the boat. They inspected the boat carefully and finally determined the application protocols were followed and suggested that perhaps it was just a bad lot of paint. I don't think they really knew for sure. And while they would not pay for the labor, they agreed to provide all the products I needed to repaint the boat. I priced out having it sprayed, and it was about $10,000 for the labor alone. The All-Grip tech expert recommended we roll and tip, so that's what we did. First, Gail and I washed the boat, and then de-waxed the topsides to remove the contaminants, and then I sanded the All-Grip off the affected area. Next, we erected scaffolding, then built wind screens from 2x4s and visqueen sheeting to act as wind barrier all the way around the boat. Wind is actually tougher to deal with than sunshine when painting, as the wind can dry the paint before it can self-level. After sanding the topsides, Gail and I rolled on 4 coats of 545 primer over the damaged area, and then rolled and tipped 4 coats of All-Grip over 10 days. It took a bit to get the technique down, but the end result was impressive. It looked sprayed from 2 feet away. The entire project cost us only our time and labor, and I was glad to have it behind me. There are a lot of advantages to rolling and tipping. It's much safer than spraying, and more paint goes on the boat. Plus, with patience, you can produce a high-quality finish without a lot of equipment or technical training. After painting the topsides, I modified the amidships bulwark butt blocks. I was never happy with the appearance of the finish on the inside, as I had left the nuts proud during the rebuild. Not an elegant solution. I removed the fasteners and drilled countersinks for the bronze nuts, which I epoxied into place. And I installed the bronze bolts and cut them flush. Then I covered the nuts with thickened epoxy and fairing compound and repainted them. It was a much better way to do it, and I was pleased with the results. I also took the bowsprit home and stripped the varnish and paint, and then reapplied it. It was a pretty simple project. While we were hauled out, the capsized 57-foot Chris White catamaran Leopard was towed to the boatyard after being discovered floating in the Gulf Stream off North Carolina. Leopard was capsized 6 months earlier in November 2016 north of the Dominican Republic. It's surmised she was flipped by a powerful waterspout. She had an experienced crew and all survived, but the boat was abandoned. It's one of those things I don't like about cats. When they capsize, you're done. Anyway, you can read all about it online. We relaunched the Far Reach in August 2017 and moved her into a marina slip at Marine Corps Air Station Cherry Point on the Neuse River. We spent the next year there sailing and making additional upgrades to the boat. An easy project to complete was to replace our Denhan kerosene stern light with a larger, brighter antique Perco kerosene light, also with a Fresnel lens and a 135-degree arc. The original light would burn about 12 hours before running out of fuel, but the larger Perco light had a longer burn time, important during the long periods of darkness associated with winter passages. One of the most important projects I completed was modifying our boom vang preventer system so I would not need to lean across the lifelines to adjust the vang preventer with its integrated cam cleat. I decided to use a clean fiddle block and instead lead the running end of the vang preventer back to the cockpit and install a separate cam cleat on the cabin top where I can adjust or release it from the forward edge of the cockpit. This system also makes jibing the boat safer. Because the cam cleats are in shear, I did not through bolt them to avoid penetrating the deck. I drilled out the core, epoxied in G10 plugs, and tapped them for bronze machine screws. I leathered the fiddle block and installed a longer half-inch double braid line. I've since built a second identical vang, so I have one on each side of the boat. No more leaning out over the lifelines to tighten or loosen the vang. With two vangs acting as vang preventers and a main sheet, I have great control of the mainsail throughout a jibe. I might add, I never sail the boat, even in the lightest winds, without a vang preventer rigged. Whatever system you choose, you must tame and control the boom because it is a dangerous weapon and probably the #1 killer on a sailboat. Another project was to upgrade the primary and secondary winches to Lumar Ocean Series bronze self-tailing winches. The primaries are number 46 2-speed and the secondary winches are number 16 single-speed. I also rebuilt the primary winch teak blocks, eliminating the bare teak riser pads, and instead mounted a silicone bronze plate on top of the pad under the primary winch. The bronze plate's primary role is to simplify varnishing and also eliminate varnish on the top horizontal surface, which is most vulnerable to solar radiation. The next project I undertook was to redesign the forestay release system which supports the staysail. Though I had installed a heat-treated Dyneema forestay, I had terminated it originally to a turnbuckle. I never liked using the turnbuckle, but it's what I had at the time. I wanted a quicker and easier way to release the forestay and then to retighten it. I decided to use a low friction ring for a 2-to-1 system secured with the Dyneema soft shackles and a Dyneema cord pendant to tighten the whole thing. I incorporated a double braid cover from a 1/2-inch stay set line and ran a 5/16 Dyneema line through the inside. I set it up so I could tighten the pendant with a rope drum on my manual windlass. It takes about 15 seconds to release the forestay and maybe 30 seconds to rig and tighten it via the windlass. I can get it tight as needed with practically no effort. To further improve this system, I removed the piston-style hanks from the staysail and replaced them with 3/4-inch diameter brass luff rings. I whipped the rings onto the grommets in the staysail, and then I ran the ducks forestay through the rings and installed a low friction ring on the bottom end of the forestay, capturing the luff rings so they wouldn't slip off. I can easily work the low friction ring out of the eye and then slide the luff rings off when necessary. The luff rings are less bulky and create less friction and wear on the jib when it crosses over the forestay while tacking if the forestay is rigged. Another thing I like about this system is we leave the staysail rigged to the Dyneema forestay, and with the sail bag on it we pull the whole thing aft and secure it to the dinghy. It's out of the way but ready to be employed, and you don't have to worry about the Dyneema forestay damaging the mast. Next, I installed an integrated bronze fairlead and cam cleat made by Reineke & Sons to the bowsprit to more easily secure the jib downhaul. In this picture, you can see both the new forestay release system running aft to the windlass as well as the jib downhaul that runs to the cam cleat on the port side of the bowsprit. After sailing the boat for nearly 3 years without interior or electric lights, I decided to install 3 LED lights, one over each bunk and a red-white light over the galley. All these lights are LED and made by Alpenglow, but make no mistake, we still use the interior kerosene lamps all the time, as no other light provides the wonderful warm glow like oil lamps. When I rebuilt the far reach, I cobbled the original damaged Dory boxes back together. They were okay, but the varnish failed early due to some contamination in the wood, and I painted them white in the Caribbean until I had a chance to build new ones, which I did, incorporating end caps so there's no exposed end grain. I made the tops removable and left them bare. This turned out to be a much better solution than the original design. To further promote ventilation, I installed a bronze mushroom vent in the aft lazarette. The cover is threaded so it can be opened and closed quite easily. I also built a removable step for climbing from the dinghy onto the far reach. I built the step from teak and Iroko offcuts and cushioned it around the edges with gunnel guard. I used bronze scraps and bent them to fit the bulwark, lining them with leather. I can position the step anywhere on the bulwark and it can be adjusted for any height. One of the advantages to rebuilding your boat is you can make previously impossible maintenance simple and routine. In this series of photos, I've removed the water tanks to wash out the bilge. It takes less than an hour to remove all the tanks. Washing out the bilge keeps the boat smelling fresh and clean. Seems to me every boat should have tanks that can be removed without tearing the interior apart. My portable Sony HF receiver worked very well for me during my first voyage to and from the Virgin Islands. It came with a short external antenna on a spool that clipped to the telescopic antenna, but I wanted something easier to employ and more performance-oriented. The radio has an external antenna jack, so I decided to use it. I took a thin piece of coated marine wire, about a number 16, and cut it about 45 feet long, and I soldered a 3.5 millimeter audio connector onto the wire and ran the wire up the center of a piece of 1/4 inch Dyneema. I spliced an eye in each end of the Dyneema. Then I whipped a small block onto the backstay about 30 feet up and wove a thin line through it. Now I can haul the antenna up the backstay and secure the other eye to the aft stanchion. Then run the remainder of the antenna across the cockpit and below to my radio. It works very well. The length does not need to be matched or tuned to the radio frequency because it is receive only. Think of it as a basket catching incoming radio waves. At some point, I may make this antenna more permanent, running the end of the antenna through a deck gland and then forward to the chart table. But for now, I like this approach. It's simple, inexpensive, and effective. I've used it for 2 round-trip voyages between North Carolina and the Virgin Islands, or about 4,000 miles, and I've been quite satisfied with its performance. I downloaded the Black Cat HF Fax app on my iPad. It took a while to learn how to use it properly, but once I did, I was able to download the Coast Guard HF weather faxes as well as the high seas forecast from my shortwave radio onto my iPad. It's not perfect, but it works pretty well. Some people think I'm a Luddite, a sailing purist, eschewing all technology, or maybe I keep things simple because I'm not mechanically inclined. Not so. As a teenager, I learned to work on engines and manual transmissions to support my drag racing hobby. And here I am rebuilding the engine of my motorcycle last year. I like engines that roar, just trying to avoid it on my sailboat. I enjoy the challenge of keeping my sailing simple and focusing on seamanship and the meditative and soul-enriching experiences of sailing in an uncomplicated and mostly traditional manner. Less is more for me when it comes to sailing. During the winter and spring of 2018, I built and installed a stronger oarlock for our sculling oar. I disassembled our simple manual windlass and re-greased it. Then I polished it, reassembled it, and reinstalled it. I also built a drink caddy I could hang on the companionway drop board to be used when sailing. And I had a fabricator weld a taller stainless steel fiddle on one side of the stove to keep the cooking pots more secure in rough conditions. In June of 2018, we sailed the boat out to Cape Lookout to test out some of our completed projects. It's a great sailing destination, and the Bight, as it's locally called, is superbly protected. It's usually where I take my departure from when heading offshore and my landfall destination of choice when I return home. In August of 2018, I flew to Vancouver, British Columbia to help my friend Kai Jacobson install the Sitka spruce mast on his gorgeous, self-built, 34-foot Hess-designed Falmouth cutter Astrid. Kai is enormously talented, and his boat is a work of art. My contribution was to splice the stainless steel rigging. We had a blast working together, and I learned a lot helping him with the final phase of his boat build. I got home from Canada just in time for Hurricane Florence to smash North Carolina. I've lived in the South most of my life, to include 15 years in Florida, and this was the most destructive hurricane I've experienced. We had a few days to prepare, and so we stripped the boat of everything and positioned her in an empty catamaran slip at Hancock Marina on the Neuse River. We worked hard, but we had some luck too. With 12 feet of surge over fixed docks, our small marina lost 5 boats sunk and another 5 thrown up on land. The Far Reach was the only boat to escape without any damage. It was a nerve-wracking experience. At the time, I felt like I aged 10 years. It's not something I want to experience again. There was a lot to relearn from this experience. Mostly boat owners who don't properly prepare their boats make life hard for everyone else who does. All these pictures are of our marina. Marinas all over the area suffered the same fate or worse. You can read about it in an article I wrote for Boat US magazine published in October 2019. While the boat escaped without damage, our community took a beating. There was massive flooding due to this slow-moving hurricane that also dumped over 30 inches of rain in our area. While our home was not spared, the damage we had was far less than what many others experienced. After cleaning up from Hurricane Florence, I had just enough time to complete a few more small projects, to include adding a locking latch to the inside of the boat. I also built a simple see-through vent drop board that can be used in ugly weather. This is a $20 project. I learned about it in a book written by Lynn and Larry Pardey. The vented drop board allows you to sail downwind in the rain and keep air moving through the boat but keep the rain out, like an old jalousie style window. Another project was to add security bars for the companionway. My best friend welded them up from a pattern I mailed him. I can lock the boat from inside or outside, if I think it's necessary, yet maintain airflow. Lastly, I installed 30-inch tall drawn brass stanchions, replacing the shorter, less safe, stock stainless steel 24-inch stanchions common on most boats under 50 feet. The taller stanchions work great with the 6 3/4-inch tall bulwarks. With all that done, we had just enough time to reprovision the Far Reach before I single-handed her back to the Virgin Islands in December 2018. But that's a story I'll pick up in the next episode. If you enjoyed this episode of Far Reach Voyages, let us know in the comments. Also, consider liking and subscribing, as it tells us you would like to see more videos and it helps the channel grow. See you next episode.